Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to all of you to our Resilience, Evolution and Recovery online event series. This is the fourth session that we have hosted this week and one that I'm particularly looking forward to, Leadership Through Crisis. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Katie Trout and I'm the Chief Executive at the GBSLEP. But before we get into the meat of our session today, we would just like to start with a very short video that highlights some of the impact the LEP has had with its partners in the public, private and academic sectors over the past year.
It's been a year like no other, but here at the GBSLEP we continue with our central ambition to drive inclusive economic growth.
From Birmingham to Bromsgrove, East Staffordshire to Redditch, Wyre Forest to Cannock Chase, Solihull to Tamworth and Lichfield, GBSLEP has been working towards our ambition of making your city region the best place to live in and to work in. In Birmingham City Centre, Phase 1 of the Paradise development opened up this year.
I was very excited at the thought that had been given to the way in which the new buildings were going to complement and help reveal some of the old sightlines of Birmingham. And now, as Phase 1's finished and Phase 2's coming on stream, I mean, it's great to see new restaurants here and occupants for the offices that are here. And it's just great to see Paradise come to life.
Away from the city centre and to Perry Bar, we've also allocated money to Birmingham City Council's build of the Alexander Stadium for the 2022 Commonwealth Games. Our investment in infrastructure enables job creation across the region, including Redditch Gateway.
The whole project is absolutely vital for the people of Redditch. The current climate with COVID and everything, I think having jobs coming to this town is absolutely key right now.
Over in Lichfield, the completion of this bridge on the southern bypass means there's access to a new housing development. Ensuring our residents have the best access to public transport is also a key achievement. In Kidderminster, a brand new station for commuters and staff.
I think it's fantastic. I mean, the station itself looks beautiful, state of the art, eco-friendly. It attracts people to come to the station. I enjoy coming to work in the morning to look at my new station.
But in order to grow our economy, we need our residents to have the right skills and training. Over 1,000 apprenticeships have been created through partnership work. At Chase Terrace Academy in Burntwood, it's full marks from this Level 3 teaching assistant.
I find it's really helping my confidence being able to obviously learn but also work as well. It's given me the experience as well as the learning opportunity.
This year also saw the start of the Inclusive Commonwealth Legacy Programme. It's aimed at developing capacity and capability for diverse-owned businesses to win contracts regionally and globally.
I've gained a lot of knowledge in a short amount of time. I've been looking to find people like this, and they're right on my doorstep. So the LEP programme has been a fantastic resource.
But of course, it's not been plain sailing. COVID-19 has had a huge impact on businesses. So we stepped up with Step Forward, our ongoing campaign to help with resilience, survival and recovery. Over in Sutton Coldfield, the Town Hall is pivoting its services.
By getting the money to invest in weddings, we now feel we've got a new lease of life, not just to compete with other people, but to be ahead.
And right across our towns and local centres, we're working with our public, private and educational sectors, creating a sense of place and belonging, from Bromsgrove to Shirley to Soho Road. It's been a busy year, and there's still plenty more to come.
Well, I hope that short video has given you a little indication of the breadth of activity we have been involved in with our partners. So now on to our Leadership in Crisis session. Like many of you, I've had a year like no other. And when we started back in March, I was very pleased that the LEP board had agreed its delivery plan for the year. I was confident that we had the right team and resources in place to deliver our priorities. And I was also confident that we would be able to continue to play our part in the impressive growth that had been taking place across the region. The advent of COVID-19 changed all of that in an incredibly short period of time. As an organisation, we've had to adapt and change our focus to one of trying to mitigate against some of the impacts of COVID-19 for both our businesses and our communities. We've had to reprioritise our resources and adapt our ways of working. Whilst this has been challenging for the LEP, I know the experiences of many other businesses and organisations out there have been much more acute. And this is why one of the reasons we really wanted to bring this session to you, to acknowledge that it's been incredibly tough for all of us. But at the same time, we wanted to offer you some insights and experiences from researchers and from leaders in their field on how you can steer through a crisis, whether that be the current pandemic or indeed something else. So many of us have had to adapt and pivot and create new flexible ways of working. And I'm sure there'll be a huge amount that you can learn from the three fantastic guests we have got today. And also I expect a huge amount we can learn from each other. So please do put any comments and thoughts you have into the chat bar. Before I introduce the guests, a little bit of housekeeping. Once each of them have spoken, we will be having a Q&A session. So please do put questions for the speakers into the chat bar as well. So in terms of our three speakers, I'm really pleased to say that the Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council, Bridget Jones, will be joining us. We also have Asha Devi, who is the Associate Director of Arup, and also Research Fellow Nicholas Bailey from the Lloyds Banking Group Centre for Responsible Business at the University of Birmingham. And this is who we start with. Nicholas is particularly interested in leadership as a social and distributed phenomenon and how leaders are developed by and respond to the challenges of different types of social pressure, risk and reward. You may also recognise Nicholas from his previous life, and I'm sure his many years as a successful actor have helped to shape his perspective on leadership. So without further ado, Nicholas, we're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks so much, Katie, and thanks to all the delegates and everybody who's made today possible. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be having the opportunity to talk to you today. When I got the brief and they asked me to talk a little bit about leadership through a crisis, I suddenly started to think about variations on that particular title. So leader in crisis, leader through crisis, and the crisis in leadership. But to look specifically at what we're talking about today, I wanted to try and communicate the distinction that I feel is at play at the center of this whole question. My research is about leadership rather than leader-ship. So it's not so much about the leader itself. The leader is the monolith. The leader is an individual with innate traits. It's about the process of leadership, leadership as practice, leadership as performance, if you will. So my background as an actor has segued nicely into what I'm doing now at the Centre for Responsible Business. And I'm looking very much into the communication within leadership and the performance of leadership being key factors in how sense-making happens in organizations, and the extent to which we can create ecosystems with flows of meaning that create a more ethical, kinder, more responsible and more sustainable condition out of which leadership can emerge. So it's much less about the individual, it's more about leadership being a process, leadership the verb rather than the noun. Now, related to leadership in a responsible sense, it's really about allying profit and purpose. So if we look, for instance, at this year, 2020, you could call it the year of the crisis. As Katie said just now, it has been a trying and troubling year. Our resilience has been tested on an individual, group, community, societal level in a way that few of us can remember. But I think it's important to talk about crises as a constant. When organizations and when individuals are managing risk, there's really a sense in which the risk is part of the change paradigm. And so is crisis. So crisis is a period of rapid change. And to an extent, you can't really prepare fully for it. But what I want to talk to you a little about today is about part of my research, which I think is relevant to this whole sense of how we can prepare for when the unforeseen comes calling. So if we look at ethics, there are three elements of ethics I wanted to talk about today. One is awareness, one is judgment, and one is ethical behavior, particularly how leadership decisions can inform behavior. So what we're trying to do is, at the center, is look for ways in which we don't have emotional dissonance, ways in which people as leaders can connect with a common purpose and values which don't deviate too much from their own values. So if this doesn't happen, then what you end up with is ethical lapse and risk of lapse occurring. And particularly around this debate is this idea of self-efficacy, the extent to which somebody is able to, or feels able to meet the challenges and tasks which stretch out in front of them. And I think particularly in the moment of risk, this is something which is particularly tested and something which, particularly when you look at the literature, is a very, very powerful, I guess, barrier to ethical practice and behavior, ethical performance. I think it's important to think about efficacy as a group thing. So if we talk about leadership being more distributed, more dynamic, then we begin to think about leaders as individuals exercising leadership, but supported by an ecosystem. One particular business that I'm talking to at the moment has found it particularly difficult to exercise leadership in the current COVID-19 situation. The exercise of leadership at a distance, virtual leadership, find it particularly difficult to hold the connective tissue together from which meaning and support comes. So I think well-being has been tested, and I think well-being is a very important element moving forward that we have to address. We have to develop a sense in which we have responsible communities of practice developed. So within people feel able to have a voice and able to contribute on a leadership level, but also to be themselves. And it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one. Now, in order to do that, we need to find a way to democratize leadership, to say it doesn't only exist in individuals. It is something which is distributed. It's something which is fair. It's something which emerges from the situation. And it's this whole situated curriculum which is at the core of my leadership. The sense in which leadership can be seen as leadership development, as an ongoing thing. So if we look at leadership in those terms, then we're thinking about the very practice of leadership being a learning and development experience. So we're not talking about individual programs. I myself have done several workshops, 1- and 2-day programs. I think for the deep meaning, we need to really look at how well-being emerges from the confidence that's engendered within self-directed learning, for instance, the personal learning cloud, and also within interventions that are to do with day-to-day operations. And from this, you begin to see leadership as a flow of communication. People are enabled by their immediate surroundings as opposed to just some nebulous mission statement or some nebulous idea of what to do. The sense in which people feel taken care of, they feel that their organizations are developing their ability to make a leadership contribution is the key. So I think in the future, what's needed, certainly looking at it through a leadership development lens, is to say that if we want to mitigate the risk of us navigating crises in the wrong way, then what we need to do is look at the way that we take care of one another within organizations. We need to develop groups and teams and organizations that take into account the development of those leadership principles and how someone's own innate leadership ability emerges and can be useful in the moment of crisis. So I've talked about self-directed learning, I've talked about well-being, I've talked about the democratization of the very idea of leadership. Now, the situated curricula that come out of that can prepare the group for the resilience that it takes to navigate that deep change when it occurs. Of course, we can't completely mitigate risk or to some degree manage it really. But what we can do is we can look at a sense in which people have a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose that connects, yes, with the organization, but also with their own innate goals, values, and sense of leadership. So getting away from this paradigm, the ideas of charismatic leadership, getting away from the ideas of transformational leadership. These are elitist concepts which, by virtue of the fact that they're supposed to be innate qualities, exclude people. And it's for this reason that people go in looking to individuals. Now, the pressure is massive when this happens. So what I would say to you is that in the future, COVID-19 has shown us that every now and again, crises are going to come forward. What we need to do as a community is develop organizations and develop confidence and group efficacy from which leadership practice in the real sense can emerge, and therefore the appropriate performances that make you have a sense that you're going to be able to look yourself in the mirror the following day. So that's what I mean by leadership as opposed to the leader. And I feel that from now on, what we need to do is develop a sense of well-being, a sense of trust, and a sense that the organization is developing the leadership through the support of the group. So thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Nicholas. Those were some fascinating insights there, and particularly that distinction between leadership and leaders. I mean, I think there's certainly a lot of questions kind of flowing through from the taster that you gave us there. So please do put those in the chat bar, and hopefully we can come and answer some of those once everybody has spoken. So now I am really pleased to welcome Asha Devi to speak to us. She is Associate Director from Arup in Solihull and has over 28 years worth of experience in the construction industry, and has been responsible for some of our probably most loved landmarks in Birmingham. Indeed, early in her career as a structural engineer, Asha was a key member of the team responsible for the design and delivery of the first phases of Brindley Place in the city. She then progressed her career in London, where she was involved in projects such as HSBC Tower at Canary Wharf, London Science Museum and Portcullis House. COVID isn't the first time Asha has found herself in a crisis situation, and hopefully we'll be able to hear a little bit more about that next. Over to you, Asha.
Thank you, Katie, for that introduction. Afternoon, everybody. Firstly, thank you for taking time to join us, and for the LEP to actually arrange all of these events. I hear they've been going very well all week. I was asked to talk about leadership through crisis, and I thought about it for a minute and felt, and I think it resonates very well with what Nicholas has just said. Did I feel like a leader, or have we led as a team, as a firm, as a group? And I feel as though we've led as a group. All of us have thought about leadership. And in looking at what Satnam had asked us to think about, how we work across different sectors, how we share knowledge, and offering some insight, I really felt I ought to put some slides together and share. So I've put up here something that our organization has come up with. It is time to revisit our business assumptions, set ourselves new goals, and succeed in the post-pandemic world. And that really has become something that we as an organization have focused on, and I personally have felt I've needed to think about. I remember walking into the office thinking, like, this is a joke, this is almost like a television program, but we are in a global pandemic. And Katie was right, I have been through other crises in the past. I have worked in countries where they have needed significant support and help. Working through the 9/11 disaster, living in New York at the time, I became part of a search and rescue team. And walking in there with a desire to help, some of us had to take a step into a leading role because some of the leadership structure had been destroyed, literally vanished in those few minutes. And therefore, we had to think about how we were going to move forward through the crisis and how New York could actually get itself back on its feet. And at the same time, try and help, try and find people, save lives, find loved ones. So there are some challenges. So everything that I'm going to present to you is on the background of having a belief that we work in a business environment, but we have more to offer. We should do more. And I think it's important that we share some of the knowledge that we're gaining around digital strategies. It has become ever more important to us. But I'm fascinated by the news yesterday evening that could we go for a lower resolution imaging on our phones to try and help with our carbon footprint, with the amount of energy we're consuming? Do we really need that high resolution? And I think that if one thing has come out of this pandemic, we're starting to question ourselves around how sustainable, how carbon neutral are we? Can we improve? And I think that's an important thread for us to think about. I think we've all been trying to help the healthcare system, and it's one of the focuses that we've had through this crisis. And we've taken a view that as a firm, as an organization, and me as an individual, to help my healthcare clients became a key focus for us. And helping them through COVID, everything from modeling A&E departments to see how we can manage the social distancing, how to get ventilation improved through theatres to protect medical staff as well as patients, how to physically get medical gases piped through hospitals. There's fire engineering implications. These are tangible things that we've been able to help with. But we have had to have colleagues and subject matter experts step into the role of taking a lead. And I think that's an important thing to acknowledge, that it is the collective that has helped us get through this pandemic and will continue to help us. We've all seen the need for our supply chain resilience. We're seeing there's a much more emphasis on faster business cases for change, to support frontline workers, to support critical functionality across the globe, really. But then things have started to come out of it, such as designing a 15-minute neighborhood. It's becoming interesting how we're localizing and starting to look at our immediate surroundings again. I personally am now much more acutely aware of my immediate community, the facilities, the shops, the restaurants, the skills that are in the vicinity, and the 15-minute neighborhood is something worth looking at. But also, I was working with a charitable group looking at homelessness in young people, but we're now starting to see how data can help prevent pandemic-related homelessness. That's become a global phenomenon that needs to be supported. So I thought I'd highlight some of these, but if you see the link below, we have set up some insights into how we're tackling COVID-19. What are the things we're discovering? What are the things that we're being asked to help with? And I think it's this sharing that has come out of this pandemic, which I think we've got to take away as a real positive in the business community. There's a lot of words on here, so apologies. But I thought I'd just give you an insight into me. In 2019, I was looking at investment cases, strategies for growth. I was looking at major transformation programs. I was also spending more than 30% of my time in the car traveling to and from meetings and locations. I spent a lot of time in traffic queues just getting back and forth to the office. I was in the office a lot. And I've put the word expensive down here. It was costing me time with my family. It was costing me time being at home, being able to relax. It was also costing me a lot of money because we were going out in very large groups, taking the teams out for drinks. And all of that's changed. And we've almost had 9-10 months of this. And I've been doing my comparisons to see how my spending profile has changed. 2020 has become much more about improving our connectivity. It's become much more about working from home, the virtual connections. I think it has given us better access to information, and our business connections have become stronger. It's also important that we as leaders take time to ask, how are you feeling? And we often ask each other, how are you coping? These are words we never heard in the professional environment. So I think the health and well-being agenda has definitely stepped up. But I've also become much more aware of wanting to reduce my carbon footprint. And I think that's going to be one of our challenges moving forward. What I want to say is that I've shown a scale that is not balanced. Keeping a balance is very important for us as leaders. I think it's essential that we maintain a perspective. I think if it was balanced, I'd personally be quite bored. I think I prefer to work in challenging environments and supporting teams. But at the same time, I think at the start of the pandemic, we probably tilted the other way and thought very much about how we were all looking after each other, staying at home. We're slowly now working back into our working environments. We're creating more insight and knowledge to share. The way we engage virtually is starting to enable us to hear from others. And it's no longer the strongest voices in the room. It's a challenge for us all, but I think we are finding our way. I think the resilience in the communities is definitely coming through. Here in the West Midlands, we've certainly stepped up the mark in terms of looking at products that can be designed locally. Some of our cottage industries have actually lifted themselves up. You know, some of the sewing from home, making masks, making aprons, anything to help our key workers is something that's testament to the way we're working. I think it's the Midland spirit that has been particularly strong. And I loved the video that was shown earlier on because it shows projects that are being delivered and continued, some of which we're working on at Arup. And I can say that, you know, the teams have shown a willingness to get out on site, work together, being careful, recognizing there is a pandemic. And I think that's the important thing, that we shouldn't forget and lose sight of that. I've tipped the balance towards work at the moment because I am seeing some challenges coming in. We're being asked to get back at the pace that we used to be before the pandemic. If it's one thing that I have picked up is that we're not just going to be able to get back to that pace. You know, only this morning I've realized we can't conduct some site works tomorrow because somebody has tested positive. And then we want to make sure that they're okay before we will move on. I think it's that human factor that's coming back into the way we work. And it's being appreciated by young and old. Our junior staff can feel isolated. And one of the things that we've been encouraging them to do is, what do you do with your time outside of work? Could you help an elderly neighbour and do their shopping? And we now have a Zoom Teams call that happens in the city centre in Birmingham, where it's called the Old Men's Coffee Morning. And they have a virtual coffee morning of some of the residents, some of the retirees who live in the city. And we've managed to persuade them to allow some of the younger people who live in the city, who work and live in the city core, to join so that they can ask them, what would you like some help with? And it's become almost like a matching exercise so that young people can go out, do the shopping and deliver it to some of the people who are too scared to leave their homes. And I think that's the kind of spirit of leadership that we want to see in our communities. So hopefully I'll keep the scales as reasonably balanced as I can, but occasionally I do like to tip them the other way. And I just want to say thank you for your time. I have put the link back down at the bottom, please copy it. And hopefully some of the insights will be of use to people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asha, for those really interesting insights there, and particularly how you as an individual, but also Arups as an organisation, has used the crisis to think differently and reflect on what is important. And I think that's something perhaps we want to come back to in the chat. So finally, on to our third guest then. I am really delighted to welcome Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council, Bridget Jones. Bridget came to the city at 18 when she started at the University of Birmingham, fell in love with the place and hasn't left. And then in 2017, she was elected as Deputy Leader of Birmingham City Council. Working at the largest metropolitan authority in England and indeed the largest authority in Europe, Bridget's agenda is to harness the power of partners across Birmingham to help drive the change our city needs, whilst also using her extensive experience to help the wider council's improvement agenda. As you can imagine, COVID-19 has been a huge challenge, not only for Birmingham City Council, but for all of our local authorities. And so, Bridget, I'll hand over to you to give some insights on how it has been from your perspective. Thank you.
Hi, and thank you so much for inviting me. So leading through a crisis is the brief. And I've sort of got the problem that it's the only way I know how to lead. I don't know what to do when things are normal. I've been deputy leader at City Council, as Katie said, since 2017. And before that, I had a 5.5-year stint running children's services and education in the city on the council's cabinet. So during the 8.5 years that I've been on the cabinet, I've had to deal with 2 major serious case reviews for child deaths. I've had to deal with the Trojan horse crisis. We've had 2 changes in council leadership, 3 major industrial disputes, including 2 bin strikes that you may remember. 2 sudden changes in chief executive, and throughout that time we've lost £750,000 from our budget and had to make round about 7,000 God, I wish it was only 7,000 people redundant. And in that time there's been 8 points at which I could have personally lost my job overnight because of elections. Basically, I'm a politician. I live or die by the ballot box, whether it be internal or public elections. So I sort of had a 9-month period between summer 2019 and March 2020 when nothing bad happened. And it was a very strange time for me. I sort of had to learn how to be a different kind of leader and lead in peacetime almost. And before I'd had a chance to get the hang of any of that, COVID came along. So it's back to crisis. So what have I learned from all of that drama? So I just want to share with you just a few insights, I suppose, I've picked up along the way. I think the first thing is you might be in a crisis, but there will always be business that has to go on as normal, and you need to make arrangements for that. And that's in a weird way for us at the council, that's never been truer than during COVID. So obviously COVID hit in March. We had to move half our workforce to working from home overnight, which for us is 11,000 odd people. We had to set up food distribution networks. We had to set up a temporary morgue. We had to start calling vulnerable people and seeing what help they needed. But actually at the same time, a huge number of things had to carry on like normal. We still had to pick up the bins. We still had children at risk who needed their social workers. We still had older and disabled adults who needed help getting up in the morning and looking after themselves. It's very rare in a crisis, even one like COVID, that absolutely everything stops. So the first bit of advice, I suppose, is take a step back and think about what things will carry on as normal and still need doing, and make sure you've got arrangements in place to keep them going despite the crisis that you may be facing. The next thing I've learned is you can't do it all, so prioritise. And once you've made your priorities, either first of all, clear your diary, and if possible, delegate things to other people you trust. So I'm only the deputy leader at the City Council. A guy called Ian Ward is the leader, and this is very much the way that we work between us. If you've got Birmingham City Council as one of your partners in a meeting, you'll usually find one of the 2 of us at a meeting. During the strikes, the bin strikes, suddenly the LEP, we both sit on the LEP board, me as the substitute, the LEP suddenly saw a lot more of me, and it's been the same during COVID. And that's because the leader has been off dealing with the strikes when they were happening. And right now I was at the LEP board this morning because the leader's been dealing with some of the things relating to COVID this morning. So make sure you've got delegation arrangements in place so that things can keep ticking over and you can clear out your diary to send somebody you trust to meetings rather than having to shoulder all of that burden yourself. When things are okay in the council, you see significantly less of me at things because the leader has more capacity there. And think about keeping 1 or 2 people in your organisation sort of clean from the crisis and uninvolved. So they've got that sort of mental capacity to do all the other stuff. Keep your eyes on the goal is the next piece of advice. It's surprisingly easy to lose sight of that. And that's both the immediate goal, but also the long-term goal as well. It can get very, very easy to get bogged down in what is happening right now and lose sight of the bigger picture as to how it might affect things going forward. So an example of that probably for me is the Trojan horse scandal that we had a few years ago in Birmingham. With that, we ended up spending a huge amount of time on 5 schools in particular where there were allegations about things that had happened. But actually, there was a much bigger picture about the governance of the school system that had sort of enabled some of this stuff to happen, and big national policy decisions and big debates we needed to have about the role of religion in schools. We lost sight of that bigger picture, though, with that crisis. We got really bogged down in the detail of dealing with these 5 schools where bad things were alleged to have happened. And it can be very, very easy when you're dealing in a crisis to get bogged down in the minutiae of things and miss that. Another example is where quickly taken decision, taken in the best of interests to fix a short-term crisis and get through it, can actually have longer-term implications that may not be apparent, may come back to bite you. So the bin crisis was an example of this. Our first bin strike that we had as a city, we actually could have fixed really quickly if we chose to. There was a really quick fix there where we could have, I won't go into it, but we could have solved it within a week or 2. However, if we'd done that quick fix, it probably would have set a legal precedent that would have cost the council a very significant amount of money a couple of years down the line. And we were sort of balancing that desire from the public to get the bins fixed quickly and to get back on track, and just the overall temptation to get that sorted and to take the quick fix, versus sort of knowing that actually that would solve the really acute pain we were in as an organisation and a city at that point in time, but it would cause longer term problems. And it's so easy to get sucked down that rabbit hole of quick fixes. So to watch out for those. You've then got sort of 2 compasses about how you guide yourself through a crisis, I find. And the first is so important. It's keeping it legal. I know that might sound obvious, but I have seen leaders get stressed out and look for a way around things so easily, and think that with the best of intentions, think that their exceptional circumstances they're in because of the crisis justify doing things off the books or doing stuff outside the rule book. And it never ends well. So it's a matter of public record. We actually lost a leader at Birmingham City Council a few years ago over some of the issues to do with one of our industrial disputes, because they did throw out the rule book and they had the absolute best of intentions for wanting to get us through that crisis and wanting a quick fix and wanting to do what they perceived to be the right thing. But in doing so and being so keen to get there, they broke some of the rules, and that came back to bite them, and they're no longer the leader now. So make sure that you're sticking to your rule book. I am a nerd. I have the council's constitution saved on bookmarked on my laptop. I'm a politician, so I've got my party's rule book in hard copy on my desk. And the amount of times I refer to those 2 things to make sure actually we're on the right track is really, really key. Governance is more vital than ever in the crisis. It's your rule book. So just get that off the shelf and make sure you're following it. And actually that will take some of the stress out of dealing with things, because your rule book has procedures in it and has things to follow. And that will, counterintuitively, it won't bog you down. It will help you see a path through. The second compass that you've got as a leader, and it's what Nicholas was really emphasising, it's your moral one and your own personal one. It's really stressful dealing with a crisis. It's a lot easier if you know that if you've got your own values in mind and you know what you're sticking to, and you know that at the end of the day, the decision, no matter how hard it might be that you're having to take, is something that you can sleep with as a person. Moving on, take advice is a really big bit of advice to me, and that can be really hard because often a crisis you might be dealing with is really confidential. So a couple of the examples I gave you earlier, I've had to deal with quite serious child abuse cases in my former role, and they have elements that it's really hard to debate with other people because they're often highly confidential and quite emotionally charged. So my way of dealing with that is I have trusted people, often outside of my organisation actually, who I can have those conversations with and chew over things. And often it's very good to have them outside of your organisation, because they don't have that sort of incentive to tell anybody else because they're on the outside and there's sort of nothing for them to gain from doing that. They're less likely to know other people and accidentally let something slip if it's highly confidential. just having that sort of step removed gives you the space to bounce things around in a sort of safe space, removed from where you are. And finally, the new challenge is working from home, of course. So I went through a bout of quite personal, intensive bullying and harassment a couple of years ago, and following that, I linked my job. Following that, I made a decision that what I would do was to keep my work at work and work as late as I needed to in the office and not bring it home, not bring the stress of it home and leave it behind. With COVID, of course, I was stuck working from home. There's nowhere else to read an angry email from the public or a tweet from somebody who doesn't think you're good enough to do your job and wants to send you abuse. Right now in COVID, there's nowhere else to read that but in your own home, which is not where I am at the moment, by the way. I'm back in the office, right? But it's really hard in COVID to separate out those work stresses from those personal ones. So I've sort of had to adapt to having one room in the house where I will take horrible, difficult phone calls, or going for a walk actually around the block to take phone calls rather than have it in my personal space. And then finally, and then I will shut up, the most important thing is just keep it in perspective. No matter how big the crisis, no matter how difficult it is, remember your friends outside of this, spend time with them, laugh things off with them. My friends are my absolute rock. They'll be the ones taking the mick out of me if I had a duff TV appearance. They think it's hilarious that I do my job. They will bring you the perspective and help you have a laugh about things and keep you going. And that is absolutely vital. And that's probably everything I've got to think about. So thank you.
Huge thank you, Bridget, for sharing those insights with us and for being so honest, I think, in terms of your personal experiences and those of the council. I must say I will now forever be worried when I see you in a meeting that it's because there is another crisis and that's why Ian Ward isn't there, but I'll try to put that aside. So we're now moving on to our Q&A session. So thank you for your contributions so far. Please do keep them coming in and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. And we're also, just to say, we're running a poll at the moment as well, so that should pop up on your screen. So please do take a few seconds to answer that if you can too. I think I just wanted to start with a question on virtual leadership. So this is a concept that you mentioned, Nicholas, and I think it's kind of fed through each of your presentations, and just would be interested to know how you keep a sort of team motivated during a crisis when you're operating virtually, and also how you can manage to develop them as well. That's one of the questions that's come through, and particularly I think someone mentioned about the challenge with younger people starting on their careers, how you help develop when you're not able to be with people physically. So I don't know, Asha, if you wanted to start off with any reflections on that.
Thank you, Katie. I'm glad that's the kind of question that's coming up into the chat. It's very important to keep your staff motivated, and one of the things we've done is gone out of our way to recognise where some of our junior colleagues are living away from home, maybe living on their own in an apartment, haven't got any outdoor space. So early on in the lockdown, we spent time making sure that we almost buddied people up, and we do that anyway with our graduate program. So we buddied people up and made sure that somebody made a phone call to check on each other. But then we realized that actually, as Bridget says, as leaders, you've got to also have a way to de-stress and manage. So then we started to think about who do we need to call from our colleagues who we know, and almost it became an informal network of ringing somebody at the end of the day and just having a 10-minute chat, grabbing a coffee. Pre-planning it sometimes helps. Knowing when is a good quiet time, just having a coffee and a chat and catching up and saying how's things going. Literally don't talk about work. And that's the kind of thing we used to do, when we were grabbing a sandwich at the cafe, or when we used to grab a cup of coffee. Those chats have gone because we're all sitting at home, but actually we've tried to create those virtually, and that has has helped us to become a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more engaged. And I think that's an important thing, is what can you do to make it more easy and comfortable to be at home and working in a virtual environment. And yes, you know, working at your dining room table. We've also opened up our office to people who felt that they could not work at home or didn't have the environment where they could concentrate. So I think it's important to recognize that if you can carefully plan it and give them support so they can come back into the office, and you're still utilizing virtual space, then I think you'll find you get a lot more support, you get a lot more encouragement, motivation. It's almost giving somebody the freedom of choice back. I think that's the key.
Thank you. And Nicholas, from your perspective and the research you've done, is there anything else you'd want to add on that sort of concept of virtual leadership? Because I don't think that's something that many of us have ever had to deal with, certainly not in the sort of the length of time period that we're doing at the moment.
Hi, thanks. First of all, Ash and Bridget, was really fascinating what you're saying. I've got about 10 paper ideas, which I'd love to talk to you guys about. I think actually virtual leadership, or the exercise of leadership, it's not a phrase that I'm actually familiar with, but it's something that is coming more and more into my research. So I would absolutely, I mean, from a research perspective, it was interesting getting your insights, Asher, as to what this is all about. From my perspective, I think it begins with the emotional component. It begins with relational dynamics. So the exercise of leadership has to change. The extent to which that is virtual is obviously is a challenge, but I think those sorts of elements, those sorts of ideas are incredibly insightful. So I would say one thing that's helped, particularly in leaders that I've been speaking to, is mindfulness practice. Groups coming together and using mindfulness as a way to create awareness and acceptance of the situation. Things like coffee roulette, where you're just thrown together with other people to have coffees. I think the exercise of leadership has to change. So therefore, the leadership story has to change. So, like you say, checking in with people is incredibly important. And also, many leaders that I've been speaking to now, one particular company that I'm going to be doing a paper about related to virtual leadership, is this idea of not being too hard on yourselves. I think this came up in, obviously, what Bridget was saying, is the idea that, okay, if you accept that the exercise of leadership has been challenged, then you look for the opportunities within those challenges, the opportunities to build that connective tissue and for people to know that you have their back. The opportunity to develop, I guess, modes of practice and engagement which are supportive, encouraging people to take care of themselves. Things like get fresh air, you know, get out into nature, clear your head. And also, one of the big things that happened to me at the Centre for Responsible Business is my boss, Professor Ian Thompson. He said in a meeting, which was a game changer for me, all my research has been caught up, everything was kind of stuck and bottlenecked, and I was stressing out about my workload. And he said to the whole team in the team meeting, he said, "We have got your back. These are unprecedented times. We are not going to make any unreal expectations, and unreal expectations are what expecting you to work at this level, at the level you were working before, would be. So do what you can, keep talking to us, don't suffer in silence. If you need to reach out, please do. Keep the lines of communication open and know that we have you." That was massive for me, because it meant that all the stress I was imposing on myself because I wanted to be more productive, I wanted to turn up in a certain way, was kind of off the table. And ever since then, I've been calling and speaking to him and sharing with him, because he built a degree of trust in me that the most that I could do was enough. And that was a game changer for me. So I would say I am going to be doing much more research around virtual leadership, because I think it's a huge factor. And it is creating a lot of stress and dissonance for leaders, which has been testified to by the other guests today. So I think it's a key thing that I'm going to be looking more into in the future.
Thank you, Nicholas, and a really kind of powerful words. I've got your back. I think we should all kind of remember that with our teams as well. Just to move on to a sort of slightly different question, and I'll put it to you, Bridget, in terms of how is it best for leaders to stay encouraged and remain in control when actually you're kind of in the midst of that crisis? And I think the specific question in the chat was things are falling apart. I'm not linking that to sort of the City Council obviously or anything like that, but in terms of how we're working, and particularly I think given the examples you were giving and how many different crises they've gone through, how you can keep up that resilience and continue, as I said, to remain encouraged and upbeat and to think that we can get through this.
I have a couple of reference points for me of particularly bad things I've dealt with, where when I'm dealing with a new crisis or something new that's happened, I sort of pull those out of my memory bank and go, it could be worse. It's not this, or this is going to sound awful, but this is quite literally some of the stuff I've dealt with. Nobody's died, or I pull things off the shelf that I've dealt with before and some of the worst experiences and go, actually, it could be worse. It's not that. And it's important. It comes back to my first point, actually. Life is, even though you're in a crisis, life is going on around it, and it can be really important just to ground yourself with some of the things that are still happening. So the examples I gave of the council during COVID, where we are still doing all of these services day to day, while still dealing with COVID. The LEP, for example, is still investing in massive projects that will be transforming, the Birmingham Solihull area. And that is still continuing despite the fact our world has been turned upside down. Actually, there are things you can ground yourself with that are outside of your immediate crisis, just to remind yourself that the world is bigger than this thing that you're dealing with that seems all consuming, and that life is going on, and actually there is still hope out there, and there are still positive things. I also have a little countdown on my phone of things I'm looking forward to day by day. At the moment, the only two things I've got on there are going on leave at Christmas, which will be sitting somewhere else in my house to where I normally work at the moment, and the winter solstice, because after that the days start getting lighter. That's always something to look forward to.
Thank you very much. I certainly know that point about kind of thinking what else is happening and how things go on. I think having a toddler through this crisis has been a great fortune in that sense, because when I'm with him, it's not like you can think about anything else. It's generally more focused on Five and Sam and important things like that. Another question in the chat bar that I'll just open up to all three of you and see who might want to comment is what your thoughts might be on having a cohesive management system to help provide organisational support for the types of leadership you need pre and during a crisis. So I'm not sure who wants to go first on answering that particular one.
I'll have a go.
Thank you.
I think the one thing I will say is that it's very difficult to predefine, and we would like to think we have cohesive management systems in place. But they need to be adaptable. That's what makes them cohesive. And if we can adapt and change and recognize that we're not all the same, some people will find they just have so much more they can give in a crisis. There are others who won't be able to do as much and need to take a step back or need to kind of regress a little bit to deal with things at home. As leaders, we don't necessarily know what we're capable of, what our strengths are, weaknesses. They evolve. What we thought were strengths at one point could be a weakness at another. And therefore, having a management system that can be flexible, that allows others to step in, is important. And one of the things that we've been trying to do through the pandemic is we've been giving a voice to others. So you're not just hearing from, the group board or regional leads, you're actually hearing from some of our subject matter experts, somebody who's got a particular interest or passion and has something quite important that they can bring to the table. So we've started to share insights based on people's perspectives, and that has made us, I think, a more cohesive management structure. And it has enabled us to, through all of the sort of tiers of experience and skills, all of the skills and tiers that are in the organization, to actually offer some insight into how we want to manage ourselves as well. Okay.
Thank you. Any other reflections, Bridget or Nicholas?
So we've just had to rethink this actually. So councils have emergency planning structures, and they are different management arrangements that are ready to swing into action the moment that there is a crisis or there is an emergency. And when COVID happened, we stood all of those up and declared an emergency and got our sort of parallel crisis management structures going. The problem for us is those structures are created to deal with a sort of quick crisis. They're there to deal with an unexploded bomb from World War II that we've dug up that might knock out, you know, a sector of the city for 24 hours. They're there to deal with a flood where, you know, the acute part is gone in 48 hours. They're there to deal with a major crash on the M6 or something. They're not there to deal with a major international pandemic that lasts 9 months and counting. So we had our plan ready to go. We had our sort of our new management structures ready to go. And sort of a few months in, we've had to go, actually, is this working? How do we thought we were ready for this. We thought we had all the plans in place. Actually, we need to rethink this, mainline some of what we're doing with COVID into our business as usual structures, because let's face it, lots of it has become business as usual because it's dragged on so long. And rethink how we have those emergency structures ready to kick in, because yeah, they're built for acute situations, not chronic.
Thank you very much, and I'm afraid that is all we've got time for on the questions this afternoon. I know there was a load more that I could have asked the speakers, but unfortunately time is against us. Just before I sum up, just to say thank you to all of you who have contributed to the polls that we have undertaken. I think from the results that we've got on the question about whether there is enough support out there at a leadership level to create innovative and entrepreneurial workplaces, the majority of you felt that there isn't.